The ancient bells of Drakmor Prime had not rung in 3 days. Across the mighty capital world of the Draknari Empire, millions of scaled beings went about their daily lives with unusual quiet, as if the very air carried the weight of unspoken dread. In the towering crystal spires that pierced the purple clouds, government officials moved with careful steps and spoke in hushed voices. Something was terribly wrong in the heart of their civilization. Deep within the imperial palace, past layers of security that could stop armies, and through corridors lined with treasures from 1,000 conquered worlds, lay the most sacred chamber in all of Draknari space. The royal nursery had been built with technology that could regulate temperature down to a single degree, control atmosphere to the exact molecule, and provide protection that could withstand the explosion of stars. Yet for all its perfection, it had become a place of growing despair. Dr. Kalax pressed his scaled palm against the viewing window and watched the 3 small forms lying motionless on beds of precious platinum and rare gems. The Dragon Queens. Cubs had not moved in hours. Born just 4 days ago with scales that shimmered like captured starlight and tiny wings that promised future majesty, they now lay as still as carved statues. Their small chests barely rose and fell with each shallow breath. Behind him, the nursery staff moved with desperate efficiency. Nutrient specialists adjusted feeding tubes that delivered perfectly balanced meals directly into the cubs' chambers. Atmospheric technicians fine-tuned the air mixture to match conditions from the most successful dragon hatchings in recorded history. Medical teams monitored vital signs on displays that showed increasingly worrying numbers with each passing hour. "Still nothing," whispered assistant nutritionist Vilex, her young voice cracking with exhaustion. She had not slept since the cubs' first refusal to eat, spending every moment trying new combinations of foods, new delivery methods, new approaches that might spark their interest. They won't even look at the food. It's like they can't see it at all. Dr. Kalax had served the royal family for over 2 centuries. He had overseen the successful hatching and rearing of dozens of lesser dragons from noble houses across the empire. He knew every scientific principle of dragon biology, every nutritional requirement, every environmental factor that influenced healthy development. Yet these 3 cubs defied everything he understood about their species. Through the reinforced walls that separated the nursery from the adjacent chamber, they could hear the sounds of the cubs' mother. Empress Valora, the Dragon Queen herself, paced her confinement with growing agitation. Her massive claws scraped against crystal floors designed to withstand her weight, and her deep vocalizations carried a note of maternal anguish that resonated through the palace foundations. She had lived for over 3,000 years, had seen the rise and fall of entire star systems, had chosen to mate only once in her long existence. These cubs represented not just her children, but the future of the royal bloodline that had ruled the Draknari Empire for 10 millennia. The separation protocol had been established centuries ago after careful study of dragon behavior. Adult dragons, even parents, posed too great a risk to newborn cubs. A single misstep from Valora's massive form could crush her children instantly. A moment of excitement could result in an accidental release of the flame that could melt steel. The barriers between mother and cubs were not cruelty but necessity, designed to protect the most precious lives in the empire. Yet as Dr. Kalax watched the cubs grow weaker, he began to wonder if their protective measures had become a prison. "Hi." Commander Thalar entered the nursery with his usual military bearing, but even his disciplined composure showed cracks of worry. His scaled face, marked by countless battles across the galaxy, carried an expression of helplessness that few had ever seen. As the Queen's personal guardian and the supreme military leader of the Empire, he bore responsibility not just for her safety, but for the stability of their entire civilization. "Report," he commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "Metabolic rates continue to decline," Dr. Kalax replied, consulting his datapad. "We have tried feeding them meat from 17 different worlds, each prepared according to optimal nutritional profiles. We have adjusted atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, and light cycles. We have introduced pheromones from successful hatchings, played recordings of healthy cubs, even attempted direct neural stimulation to trigger feeding responses. Thaler studied the motionless cubs through the viewing window. In his long military career, he had faced enemies that could destroy planets and commanded fleets that could conquer star systems. But these tiny creatures, no larger than the domestic animals kept by lesser species, represented a threat greater than any army. If they died, the succession crisis would tear the Empire apart. Noble houses across 47 star systems would claim the right to rule. Trade routes would close, military alliances would collapse, and the peace that had lasted for centuries would shatter in civil war. "How much time do we have?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Dr. Kalax consulted, his readings again, his expression growing more grave. "At their current rate of decline, perhaps 2 more days. Their energy reserves are nearly depleted. Soon their organs will begin to shut down, and even if we find a solution, it may be too late to save them." The implications hung in the air, like a toxic cloud. News of the cubs' condition had already begun to leak despite their efforts at secrecy. 3 outer rim systems had declared martial law in anticipation of succession conflicts. Merchant guilds were moving assets to secure locations. Military commanders were receiving discreet orders to prepare for possible civil war. The mere possibility of the cubs' death was already destabilizing a civilization that spanned nearly half the galaxy. From the adjacent chamber, Empress Valora's cries grew more desperate. The Dragon Queen's anguish echoed through the palace walls, a sound of pure, maternal grief that transcended species barriers. She knew her children were dying, could sense their weakness through the barriers that kept them apart, yet she remained powerless to help them. Dr. Kalax looked at his readings one more time, hoping against hope to see some sign of improvement. The numbers remained unchanged. 3 small lives hung in the balance, and with them, the fate of one of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. Everything they had tried had failed. Every scientific approach had proven useless. They were running out of time, out of options, and out of hope. The silent nursery kept its vigil over the dying cubs, while outside, an empire held its breath and waited for news that might never come. The emergency council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from across the Dreknari Empire gathered in desperate conference. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing disturbing reports from dozens of star systems. On the remote, mining world of Kelleros, dragon nobles had begun mobilizing their private armies. The wealthy trade houses of the Nexus sector were moving their fleets to defensive positions. Even on peaceful agricultural worlds, local governors were receiving urgent communications about succession protocols that had not been invoked in over 1,000 years. Minister Zorak, ancient even by Draknari standards, stood at the center of the circular chamber with his ceremonial robes rustling around his massive frame. His voice carried the weight of 5 centuries of government service as he addressed the assembled leaders. "The situation deteriorates by the hour. Our intelligence networks report that 7 major houses have begun preliminary discussions about their claims to the throne. If the cubs die, we will face civil war within days." Around the chamber, heads nodded in grim acknowledgement. The Draknari Empire had been built on the absolute authority of the Dragon Queen and her royal bloodline. For 10,000 years, that authority had never been seriously challenged because the succession had always been clear. But if Empress Valora's cubs died without producing heirs, the careful balance of power that kept 47 star systems united would collapse. General Corvin, commander of the 3rd Fleet, activated a tactical display showing ship movements across the outer territories. "My scouts report unusual activity along the border regions. Several noble houses are moving their military assets into strategic positions under the guise of routine exercises. They're preparing for war, whether they admit it or not." High Commander Thaler entered the chamber with heavy steps, his military, bearing unable to hide the exhaustion that marked his features. All eyes turned to him as he took his position at the council table. The question in everyone's minds remained unspoken, but their desperate expressions made it clear. "No change," Thaler reported, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Dr. Kalax and his team have exhausted every known approach. The cubs continue to weaken. We have perhaps 36 hours remaining." The silence that followed was deafening. These were beings who had conquered star systems, who had never known defeat in their long expansion across the galaxy. Yet they found themselves helpless before three tiny creatures who simply refused to eat. Minister Zorak activated his personal display, showing historical records of past succession crises. We must consider all possibilities no matter how desperate they may seem. The stability of our entire civilization hangs in the balance. What possibilities remain? Demanded General Corvin. Our finest scientists have tried everything. Our medical specialists have consulted records going back millennia. What else can we do? Thaler hesitated, knowing his next words would shock the assembly. There is one option we have not explored, one that goes against everything we believe about our own superiority, but which may be our only hope. He activated a holographic display showing a small blue-green world in a distant spiral arm of the galaxy. The planet looked unremarkable compared to the grand worlds of the Draknari Empire, with simple landmasses and primitive cloud patterns. Yet something about the data accompanying the image made several council members lean forward with interest. This is Earth, Thaler continued, homeworld of the species known as humans. They achieved spaceflight barely 100 of their years ago. Their technology is primitive by our standards, their ships are slow, and their weapons are laughably weak. By every measure of civilization we recognize they should be irrelevant. Minister Zorak's ancient eyes narrowed with confusion. Then why do you mention them? Thaler expanded the display to show detailed biological surveys of Earth. The information was fascinating and deeply disturbing to Draknari sensibilities. Because they share their world with over 8 million other species, including numerous apex predators that should have driven them to extinction long ago, yet somehow, they not only survive alongside these dangerous creatures but have formed bonds with them. The display showed images that had puzzled Draknari xenobiologists for decades. Humans swimming with creatures that could tear them apart in seconds. Humans raising young predators in their own homes. Humans walking unarmed among packs of deadly hunters and somehow emerging unharmed. They call it domestication, Thaler explained. But our research suggests it is something far more sophisticated. They seem to possess an intuitive understanding of predator psychology that allows them to form relationships where our science would predict only violence. General Corvin studied the images with growing incredulity. You are suggesting that these primitive beings might understand something about predators that we do not? I am suggesting that we have tried every scientific approach our civilization can offer, and all have failed. Perhaps it is time to try something unscientific. The debate that erupted was fierce and immediate. Ancient prejudices about the superiority of Draknari civilization clashed with desperate need for any solution. Several council members argued that seeking help from such a young species would be seen as a sign of weakness that would encourage their enemies. Others pointed out that weakness would be irrelevant if their empire collapsed into civil war. Minister Korvac, whose family had served the royal line for generations, stood with his crest flaring in indignation. We have conquered worlds that had been exploring space while humans were still living in caves. We have mastered technologies they cannot even comprehend. What could they possibly teach us about our own species? The argument continued for hours, but underneath the heated exchanges lay a growing sense of inevitability. Traditional approaches had failed completely. The cubs were dying despite receiving the best care their advanced civilization could provide. Time was running out, and pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. As the debate reached its peak, the chamber doors opened with a sound like distant thunder. Empress Valora herself entered, her massive form filling the space with overwhelming presence. The Dragon Queen had not attended a council meeting in over a century, preferring to rule through her chosen representatives. Her appearance now silenced every voice in the chamber instantly. When Valora spoke, her words carried the absolute authority of thousands of years of royal rule. I have listened to your arguments from my chambers. I have heard every objection, every concern about our reputation and our standing among the lesser species. But I'm a mother watching her children die while you debate politics. Her golden eyes swept the chamber, meeting the gaze of each council member in turn. Contact the humans immediately. If there is even the smallest possibility that they can, Help my cubs, then pride is a luxury we cannot afford. I would rather rule a humbled empire than watch my bloodline end in a sterile nursery. The Queen's words settled the debate instantly. Within an hour, the fastest communication array in the Empire was transmitting a message across the galaxy to the small blue world where humanity had only recently learned to reach for the stars. The message was simple and unprecedented. The mighty Draknari Empire, rulers of 47 star systems and conquerors of 1,000 worlds, were formally requesting assistance from the youngest spacefaring species in known space. The transmission would take 2 days to reach Earth and another day for any response to return. Meanwhile, 3 small cubs continued their slow decline toward death, unaware that their survival had become a matter of interstellar politics and desperate gambles on the unknown capabilities of a species most of the galaxy considered barely civilized. Snow crunched under Dr. Emma Fields's boots as she made her way through the Canadian Wilderness Preserve, carrying a bucket of prepared meat toward the wolf enclosure. The morning air was sharp and clean, filled with the scent of pine trees and the distant sounds of wildlife going about their daily routines. This was where Emma felt most at home, surrounded by creatures that most people feared, but which she had spent her life learning to understand. The alpha female of the pack, a magnificent gray wolf named Luna, approached the fence with cautious interest. Emma had been working with this particular pack for 3 years, gradually building trust and studying their complex social behaviors. Unlike the sterile laboratories where most animal research took place, this preserve allowed her to observe natural pack dynamics in a semi-wild environment. "Good morning, beautiful," Emma said softly, her voice carrying the calm confidence that came from years of working with apex predators. Luna's ears perked forward, recognizing not just Emma's voice, but the subtle body language that communicated safety and respect. The wolf's packmates emerged from their den, 6 adults and 4 juveniles who had learned to associate Emma's presence with food and gentle interaction. Emma's communication device buzzed with an urgent priority signal, but she ignored it for the moment. The wolves deserved her full attention during feeding time. Any distraction, any sign of nervousness or hurry, could disrupt the careful relationships she had built. She distributed the meat portions according to the pack's natural hierarchy, watching as Luna claimed the first share and then allowed the others to feed in their established order. It was only after the wolves had settled into their post-meal contentment that Emma checked her messages. What she saw made her stop breathing for a moment. A quantum transmission marked with the highest priority codes, originating from somewhere so far away that the stellar coordinates meant nothing to her. But the sender identification made her heart race. The Draknari Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in known space. The message was brief, but extraordinary. The Draknari were requesting immediate assistance with a crisis involving their royal offspring. They specifically wanted Emma Fields, whose research papers on cross-species bonding had somehow reached their attention across the vast distances of space. They were sending a ship to collect her immediately. Emma read the message 3 more times, certain she must be misunderstanding something. The Draknari were legendary among human xenobiologists, a species so advanced that they barely acknowledged humanity's existence. Their dragon-like physiology and vast interstellar empire had made them objects of fascination and fear since first contact. Yet they were asking for her help with what appeared to be a problem involving their young. Within 6 hours, a sleek vessel descended from the sky with technology so advanced that it made no sound and left no visible exhaust. Emma packed quickly, bringing her field notes, research materials, and the specialized equipment she used for behavioral analysis. Her colleague Dr. Roberts would take over care of the wolf pack, though he remained bewildered by the sudden turn of events. The journey to Drakmor Prime took 4 days aboard what the Draknari pilot dismissively called a short-range courier vessel. To Emma, it represented technology beyond human dreams, with propulsion systems that bent space itself and life support that perfectly replicated Earth's atmosphere. She spent the time reviewing everything humanity knew about Draknari biology and social structures, which unfortunately wasn't very much. High Commander Thalar met her at the landing platform, his massive reptilian form towering over her despite his obvious attempts to appear non-threatening. Emma had seen images of Draknari before, but encountering one in person was overwhelming. His scales caught the light of alien suns. His eyes held intelligence that spoke of centuries of experience, and his presence radiated an authority that came from ruling star systems. Dr. Fields, his voice rumbled through translation devices that rendered his words in perfect English. I must confess we are uncertain how to proceed. Your species is unknown to us in many ways. We have never requested assistance from such a young civilization before. Emma studied the alien commander, noting details that her training had taught her to recognize across species barriers. The slight lowering of his crested head indicated stress. The way his claws gripped and released repeatedly suggested anxiety. His massive tail remained perfectly still, which in many reptilian species indicated extreme emotional control. This was a being under tremendous pressure, trying to maintain dignity while facing a crisis beyond his experience. Commander, Emma replied carefully, I think we should start with me seeing the cubs, not examining them or analyzing them scientifically, just seeing them as they are right now. The request seemed to puzzle Thalar, but he led her through corridors that grew progressively more magnificent as they approached the royal chambers. Emma couldn't help but marvel at the scale of everything around her. The palace alone was larger than most human cities, built with materials that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. Guards stood at attention every few meters, their elaborate armor and weapons speaking of a military tradition that stretched back millennia. When they reached the royal nursery, Emma's first glimpse of the cubs took her breath away. Even in their weakened state, they were magnificent creatures. Each was roughly the size of a large dog, with scales that shimmered like oil on water and tiny wings folded against their sides. But what struck Emma most was not their beauty but their absolute stillness. They lay on beds of precious metals and gems, surrounded by every conceivable luxury, yet they seemed as lifeless as museum displays. Emma moved closer to the viewing window, her trained eye taking in details that the advanced monitoring systems might miss. The cubs' breathing was shallow but regular. Their eyes, though closed, showed rapid movement beneath the lids that suggested active dreaming. Most importantly, their positioning relative to each other indicated they were aware of their siblings' presence and took some comfort from it. Where is their mother? Emma asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Empress Valora is in the adjacent chamber, Thalar explained, gesturing toward the thick barrier that separated the nursery from another room. For safety reasons, she cannot be in direct contact with the cubs until they are older and less fragile. Adult dragons pose too great a risk to newborns. Emma studied the barrier, noting its impressive thickness and the complex locking mechanisms that secured it. Through the reinforced viewing port, she could see the shadow of an enormous form moving restlessly in the chamber beyond. How long have they been separated? Since the moment of hatching, as is traditional and necessary. Cubs must develop independence and physical strength before they can safely interact with an adult dragon. Emma felt a chill of understanding begin to form. She thought of the wolf pack she had left behind, of the intricate social bonds that held them together. She remembered elephant herds she had studied in Africa, where separation from the matriarch could cause young calves to waste away despite abundant food and perfect care. Commander, I need to review the historical records of successful cub rearing, not just the scientific data, but actual behavioral observations of what happened during the hatching and early development periods. As they accessed centuries of carefully documented royal hatchings, Emma's growing suspicions were confirmed. In every successful case, she found unique circumstances that had forced deviations from standard protocol. Emergency situations where barriers had been damaged, allowing extended contact between mother and cubs. Political crises that had delayed the implementation of separation procedures. Natural disasters that had disrupted normal nursery operations and forced improvised solutions. The pattern was clear to someone trained in animal psychology, though it went against everything the Draknari believed about their own species. Emma, turned to Thalar with growing certainty, knowing her next words would challenge millennia of established tradition. "Commander, the cubs aren't rejecting food. They're rejecting abandonment." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Dreknari had believed about themselves for thousands of years. Emma watched as High Commander Thalar processed her statement, his massive form going perfectly still in the way she had observed in many powerful predators when confronted with something that threatened their understanding of the world. Dr. Kelax, who had been monitoring the cubs' vital signs with increasing desperation, turned from his instruments with disbelief, written across his scaled features. "Abandonment. Dr. Fields, I must respectfully disagree with your assessment. The cubs are receiving optimal care in controlled conditions specifically designed for their safety and development. They are not abandoned. They are protected." Emma approached the viewing window again, studying not just the cubs but the entire environment they inhabited. The nursery was a marvel of advanced technology, with atmospheric controls that could adjust to microscopic levels, temperature regulation that never varied by even a fraction of a degree, and nutritional delivery systems that provided perfectly balanced meals at precisely timed intervals. By every scientific measure, it was the ideal environment for raising young dragons. Yet something fundamental was missing, something that no amount of technology could provide. Emma thought of the countless hours she had spent observing family groups across dozens of species, from wolves and elephants to dolphins and primates. In every case, the bond between parent and offspring was not just about physical care, but about emotional connection, about the young learning their place in a complex social structure. "Look at their positioning," Emma said, pointing to the three cubs. "See how they're arranged in relation to each other? They're seeking comfort from sibling contact, but notice how they're all oriented toward that wall." She indicated the barrier that separated them from their mother's chamber. "They know she's there. They can probably smell her, hear her, maybe even sense her emotional state, but they can't reach her." Thalar studied the cubs with new awareness, his military mind beginning to process the implications of Emma's observations. "You are suggesting that physical separation from the mother causes psychological distress that manifests as refusal to feed?" "More than that," Emma replied, pulling up her field notes on her portable device. "In every social predator species I've studied, feeding behaviors are deeply connected to pack or family dynamics. Young animals often refuse to eat when they sense instability in their social structure. It's a survival mechanism. If the family unit is threatened, individual survival becomes secondary to maintaining group cohesion." Dr. Kelax consulted his historical databases with newfound urgency, cross-referencing Emma's observations with centuries of recorded hatchings. What he found disturbed him greatly. "Dr. Fields, if your theory is correct, then our protocols may have been causing unnecessary stress in every generation of royal cubs. But the risks of direct contact remain unchanged. One inadvertent movement from Empress Valora could crush all three cubs instantly." The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Dr. Kelax presented detailed risk assessments, statistical analyses of historical accidents, and dire warnings about the catastrophic consequences of a single mistake. The nursery staff, who had devoted their lives to perfecting the scientific care of royal offspring, struggled to accept that their methods might be fundamentally flawed. But as they argued, the cubs continued to weaken visibly. Their breathing became more labored, their periods of alertness grew shorter, and the monitoring displays showed metabolic functions dropping toward critical levels. Time was running out, and conventional approaches had already proven useless. The moment of decision came when Empress Valora herself appeared at the viewing port that connected her chamber to the nursery. The Dragon Queen's massive form filled the window, her golden eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that transcended species barriers. When she spoke, her voice resonated through the reinforced walls with the authority of millennia. "Human," the translation devices carried her words throughout the chamber, "you see what my own scientists cannot. You look at my children and see more than biological processes that need optimization. You see living beings with emotional needs that technology cannot satisfy." Valora's gaze moved to her cubs, and Emma watched as the massive dragon's expression shifted to one of pure maternal anguish. "I have lived for over 3,000 years. I have commanded fleets that conquered star systems and ruled an empire that spans half the galaxy. Yet I am powerless to help my own children because protocols designed to protect them may be causing their deaths." The Dragon Queen's next words would have been impossible to imagine from any Draknari leader under normal circumstances. "Dr. Fields, if you believe that direct contact between mother and cubs is necessary for their survival, then I am willing to risk everything on your judgment. I would rather face the possibility of accidentally harming my children than watch them waste away in artificial safety." The removal of the barriers began immediately, but with agonizing care. Each layer of protection was retracted slowly, with multiple safety teams standing ready to reactivate the shields at the first sign of danger. Emma found herself holding her breath as massive blast doors rolled back and force fields powered down. The technology that had kept mother and cubs apart for their entire short lives was being systematically dismantled based on the theories of a human who had never seen a dragon before this week. As the final partition lifted, Empress Valora moved, with impossible grace for such a massive creature. Each step was calculated, each gesture deliberate. Her enormous claws, capable of tearing through starship hulls, touched the crystalline floor with delicate precision. As she approached her cubs, she began to vocalize, a deep, thrumming sound that seemed to vibrate through Emma's bones and resonate in frequencies that human ears could barely perceive. The effect on the cubs was immediate and dramatic. 3 small heads lifted simultaneously, weak but alert for the first time since their hatching. Their eyes, previously dull with neglect and approaching death, began to focus with increasing clarity. Their tiny wings, which had remained folded and motionless, fluttered with the first signs of voluntary movement they had displayed. But they still did not approach the food that had been placed around their bedding area. Emma watched the interaction with growing understanding, recognizing patterns she had seen in wolf dens and elephant nurseries. "She needs to feed them directly," Emma said quietly. "Not just provide food, but actually participate in the feeding process." What followed challenged every assumption the Draknari had made about the nature of their own species. Empress Valora, the mighty ruler of an interstellar empire, began to pre-chew portions of meat with delicate precision. Her massive jaws, designed to crush the armor of enemy warships, handled the food preparation with infinite care. Then, moving with the slow patience of a creature who understood that one mistake could destroy everything precious to her, she offered the prepared food to each cub individually. The first cub to accept nourishment from its mother's jaws triggered an emotional response that affected everyone in the chamber. Emma felt tears flowing down her cheeks as she watched the tiny creature take its first voluntary meal in days. The Draknari staff, despite their scientific training, found themselves moved by the display of maternal care that their protocols had prevented for so long. One by one, the remaining cubs began to eat. The transformation was remarkable. Within hours, they showed more energy and alertness than they had since the moment of hatching. Their scales began to brighten, their movements became more coordinated, and most importantly, they began to display the curiosity and playfulness that marked healthy young predators. But Emma noticed something else in their behavior, something that reminded her of wolf cubs learning their place in the pack hierarchy. "They're going to need more than just their mother," she observed. "They need to understand their place in a larger social structure. They need what humans call a family." 6 months later, Emma stood on a balcony overlooking the ceremonial plaza of Drakmor Prime, watching as beings from 37 different star systems gathered for an event that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The formal alliance signing between the Draknari Empire and humanity was about to take place, but the real significance of the day was evident in the small details that most observers would miss. Near the ceremonial platform, 3 young dragons played under the watchful eyes of their mother. The cubs had grown into healthy adolescents, their scales now gleaming with full brilliance and their wings strong enough for short flights around the palace grounds. But what made them truly remarkable was their behavior toward the various alien dignitaries and human representatives who had come for the ceremony. The youngest cub, whom Emma had privately named Spark for his boundless curiosity, approached a group of delegates from the Centauri Trade Federation with confident interest. Instead of the careful distance that adult Draknari maintained from other species, he displayed the same open friendliness that Emma had fostered during his early development. His siblings, equally bold and socially engaged, moved through the crowd as natural ambassadors for a new kind of interspecies relationship. High Commander Thalar joined Emma on the balcony, his presence no longer intimidating but somehow reassuring. Over the months of working together, they had developed the kind of professional respect that transcended species boundaries. "They are remarkable," he said, watching the cubs interact with visitors. Dr. Keelax claims they display social behaviors that have never been documented in royal dragons before. Emma smiled as she watched Spark attempt to communicate with a group of human children who had come with the diplomatic mission. The young dragon's patient efforts to bridge the gap between his species and theirs reminded her of the breakthrough moments that had saved his life. "They learned something that their ancestors never had the chance to learn," she replied. "That different species can be family too." The transformation had not been limited to the cub's survival. Working closely with Empress Valora to establish new protocols for royal dragon rearing had created ripple effects throughout Draknari society. The success of integrating emotional understanding with scientific method had inspired researchers across the Empire to reconsider their approaches to everything from agriculture to interstellar diplomacy. Dr. Keelax, once skeptical of human methods, now collaborated with Emma on research projects that combined Draknari precision with human intuition. Their joint papers on cross-species emotional bonding had become required reading in xenobiology programs across dozens of worlds. More importantly, their work had led to practical applications that were changing how the galaxy's species interacted with each other. The Vorthon Collective has requested human mediators for their trade dispute with the Silicon Republics, Thalar mentioned, consulting his communication device. The crystalline hegemony wants to establish an exchange program with Earth's wildlife conservation experts. Even the isolationist phantom worlds are asking about human approaches to intergenerational communication problems. Emma nodded, unsurprised by the growing demand for human expertise in areas that had nothing to do with technology or military might. Word of the cub's recovery had spread quickly through diplomatic channels, but the real impact came from the relationships that had formed. In its aftermath, Draknari nobles who had observed the new family dynamic had begun questioning their own traditional approaches to child rearing and social organization. The ceremony itself was magnificent, with representatives from major civilizations formally acknowledging the partnership between humanity and the Draknari Empire. Treaties were signed, trade agreements were established, and mutual defense pacts were ratified. But Emma found herself more interested in the unofficial interactions happening around the formal proceedings. She watched a human pediatric psychologist deepen conversation with a Draknari educator about childhood development across species lines. A group of human-animal behaviorists were comparing notes with Draknari sociologists about pack dynamics in different gravitational environments. Most remarkably, she saw young Draknari dragons from noble houses across the Empire playing alongside human children, their games creating new forms of communication that neither species had imagined before. Empress Valora herself delivered the keynote address, her words translated and broadcast across the galaxy. The Dragon Queen's message resonated far beyond the ceremony's official purpose. "The humans did not save my cubs through superior technology or greater scientific knowledge. They saved them by recognizing what we had forgotten in our pursuit of perfect control. That strength without compassion becomes mere destruction, and wisdom without empathy becomes mere data." The Empress paused, her golden eyes finding Emma in the crowd. "They reminded us that the most dangerous predators in any ecosystem can become the most loyal allies when trust and understanding replace fear and domination. This lesson extends far beyond the nursery where my cubs first learned to trust." As the formal ceremony concluded and delegates began to mingle, Emma found herself surrounded by requests for consultation on dozens of seemingly impossible problems. The methane breathers of Titan 7 wanted help communicating with their silicon-based neighbors. The hive minds of the outer spiral were struggling with individualistic species who refused to join their collective consciousness. Even the machine, intelligences of the quantum network, were asking about biological approaches to problem solving. Each request represented challenges that had seemed insurmountable through traditional diplomatic or scientific methods. But Emma had learned that the same principles that saved 3 dying dragon cubs could be applied on much larger scales. Understanding what different species truly needed, rather than what they claimed to want, often revealed solutions that satisfied everyone involved. The real validation of her approach came during the reception that followed the ceremony. Emma watched as the 3 young dragons moved freely among the gathered aliens and humans, their natural curiosity and friendly demeanor breaking down barriers that had existed for centuries. They had become living proof that different species could not only coexist but could genuinely care for each other. Spark, now nearly the size of a small horse but still possessed of boundless enthusiasm, approached a group of elderly human diplomats with the respectful playfulness that marked well-socialized young predators. His gentle nuzzling and patient attempts at communication drew smiles from beings who had spent their careers maintaining careful professional distances from alien species. Dr. Kalax joined Emma as she observed the interactions, his expression thoughtful. "I have been reviewing our historical records more carefully," he said. "Your approach to the cubs has made me question many assumptions we have maintained about our own development. I believe we may have been creating unnecessary barriers between ourselves and other species for millennia." Emma nodded, remembering her first glimpse of the isolated nursery where 3 cubs had been dying of loneliness despite receiving perfect, technical care. Sometimes the most advanced approach is actually the simplest one. Every intelligent species in the galaxy evolved from creatures that formed social bonds to survive. We all share that fundamental need for connection, even when our technologies make it seem unnecessary. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself in conversation with beings she would never have imagined meeting when she was feeding wolves in the Canadian wilderness. Trade representatives from crystalline worlds discussed family structures with her. Military leaders from warrior cultures asked about conflict resolution through understanding rather than force. Scientists from species that had achieved interstellar travel thousands of years before humanity wanted to learn about intuitive approaches to research. The most significant moment came when young Spark approached Emma directly, his developing communication skills allowing him to express gratitude in ways that transcended language barriers. The dragon cub who had been hours from death now radiated health and confidence, his bright eyes reflecting an intelligence shaped by love rather than isolation. High Commander Thaler, observing the interaction, made a comment that would later be recorded in diplomatic histories. "Your species has taught us that the greatest strength in the galaxy is not the ability to conquer worlds, but the ability to understand the hearts of the beings who inhabit them." Emma spent several more weeks on Drakmor Prime, helping to establish the new protocols that would guide future dragon child rearing and training a new generation of Draknari specialists in emotional bonding techniques. When she finally returned to Earth, she carried with her formal agreements for extensive scientific and cultural exchanges that would benefit both civilizations for generations to come. But perhaps more importantly, she carried the knowledge that 3 small dragon cubs had helped prove something remarkable about the nature of intelligence and civilization itself. The most advanced societies were not those with the most powerful weapons or the most sophisticated technologies, but those that understood the fundamental connections that bound all living beings together. Years later, as Emma continued her work with Earth's predator species, she would often receive messages from across the galaxy, updates on the cubs' development as they grew into wise and compassionate adult dragons, reports of successful applications of her bonding techniques to problems on dozens of different worlds. Most satisfying of all, images and recordings of young beings from countless species learning to see each other not as threats or resources, but as potential family. The galaxy had indeed changed forever, not through conquest or technological advancement, but through the simple recognition that every creature, no matter how strange or dangerous it might seem, carried within it the same fundamental need for understanding and acceptance that had once driven 3 small dragon cubs to refuse food from everyone except the one human who truly saw them as individuals deserving of love.